Scientists. What mad supervillain experiment do you actually want to conduct in real life? I want to do a long-term case study on children's microbiome. It would start off with samples of their mother's microbiome, and then when the child is first born, get a sample of theirs, compare it, and continue comparing the two samples throughout chest feeding versus bottle feeding. Also, get a detailed comparison of how the microbiome changes after vaccinations, sickness, and antibiotics. I would basically study every single number 2 this child has, their eating habits, their health conditions, any medications and vaccinations for years. But people want privacy, and most wouldn't want to commit to keeping such accurate accounts of their children's food, health, and activities. So it's likely that even if I did this study, it would be difficult to prove all variables were accounted for. And with all the variability, I would need many, many children. The end goal is to see how our microbiome changes throughout your childhood, and note when you may be more susceptible to things depending on the type of microflora you have. Everyone has a different ratio, so essentially, if we can harness the individual's capability of unique flora, we could find a whole new way to tackle illnesses and preventatives for sicknesses that would have significantly less side effects than many other medications. This idea stems from others studying the microbiome and finding that certain ratios of microflora can cause you to get over illnesses quicker when combined with the right medicine, and also help digestive tracts regulate better. But so far, these tests are being done with cancer patients. I think if we're able to see how children are affected, it may bring less possibilities of terminal illness and other illnesses down the road, as well as a faster recovery. And everyone is telling me to have a kid or become a nanny and collect the number 2? No, the point of this study is that it needs to include thousands of participants. I want to take DNA from infamous serial unalivers like Jeffrey Dahmer or Albert Fish, or the like, and clone them, then have the baby raised in a normal, supportive, loving family. I'd study the kids all through adulthood to see how much is nurture and how much is nature. I experiment on ancient coins. Museums are generally against me doing a full compositional analysis that would involve me dissolving the whole coin in acid, but it sure would tell us a lot more than not. As a student of history, I can confirm that just about every person in my field would have had massive issues with this. However, I'm not sure that the results would lead to any true mad scientist outcome, just a bunch of crying museum custodians and a slightly better idea of the composition of ancient coins. I'm a physician, and I would love to see how far the placebo effect really goes. For those who aren't familiar, the placebo effect is an unexplained phenomena where people who take medications that aren't real but believe they're real have an actual measurable effect on their illness. People with depression who take sugar pills report feeling happier. People with pain who take sugar pills report a decrease to their pain, among other things. I've seen even crazier ones where people think they're having surgery for their bad knee, but the docs just put them under, make an incision on their knee, do nothing, sew them back up, and patients report improvement to their bad knee. So part of me just wants to explore this crap to its full extent. Can we treat chronic illnesses like arthritis, lupus, and bipolar disorder with just placebos? Can you imagine if someone's human immunodeficiency virus viral load decreased while they were eating Skittles and thinking it's a new miracle drug? But it's pretty much just fantasy. You'd have to take 2 groups of the same disease's positive individuals, give one real medicine and the other one Skittles, and this is profoundly unethical. For those of you who are saying that's how clinical trials work, the answer is not really. According to Article 11.3 of the Declaration of Helsinki, which is the ethical guidance of clinicians overseeing clinical trials, it's unethical to use placebo arms if there exists a proven medication for the condition. If you're testing a new drug on your control group, it's whatever the best treatment available on the market is, not a placebo. It's very rare that a disease or condition has no effective treatments out there that would justify the use of a placebo to measure clinical effectiveness. In my human immunodeficiency virus example, this is obviously not plausible. We have meds that lower that particular disease's viral load already. I would like to clone myself. Nature versus nurture. Sorry dude, you can have as many kids as possible with one woman, but you can't clone yourself. I can't even do it once. Identical twins is totally fine also. Experiments with social isolation intrigue me. Raise a child with no language and see what happens. No contact, Wild children give us some insights, but also a sample of the kind of trauma this can produce. Completely and undeniably unethical, incredibly cruel, but so intriguing. This has already been done and documented in the past. There was this king who believed that children raised in complete isolation would naturally speak Greek. So to test this, he ordered a group of babies to be placed in isolation from adults, and a few times per day, midwives would feed or clean them, and the result of this experiment was that every single baby died even though they were being fed. This reminds me of the chicken boy. The poor child was locked in a chicken coop for the first few years of his life, and as such, he thought he was a chicken. Absolutely tragic, but still fascinating. I want to work on genetically modifying the genes that control our active cones in our eyes. Specifically, I want to try to activate a tertiary cone in the eyes of dogs so that they can see infrared light just like snakes can. In simpler terms, we could make rescue dogs that have infrared vision to help locate missing people or recover people in natural disasters. In even simpler terms than that, I want to make heat-seeking dogs. I want a substance-heavy Olympics where everyone is using something to enhance their performance, to see the true limit of humans. Now, I wouldn't say mad scientist, but medical privacy laws get in the way of a lot of incredibly useful research. Everything has to be so de-identified and confidential that it makes doing any sort of large-scale statistics nearly impossible. You have to make a ton of assumptions because you can't know many details. If I had full access to everyone's medical records, we would probably fix a whole lot of crap. Yeah, I have to admit, it is fascinating to listen to our actual medical and science PhD people talk about the possibilities we could unlock if all ethics were removed. On the other hand, I can see why we can't do these experiments. Take the following one, for example. I'd want to know how long it would take a group of children raised to puberty to figure out about doing the deed. I'm sure they'd figure out pickle and bean tickling on some level, but how long would it take them to figure out tab A into slot B? The subjects could be raised about as normal as possible, but with any mentioning of reproduction and copulation completely removed. And there would be no shame or deterrent while they figure it out. Like the caretakers wouldn't tell them, "We don't do that," if they found out one was whacking the mule, or that two consenting teenagers were touching each other. There would be some kind of explanation with trying to encourage that kind of stuff in private instead of around the others. I'm just curious about how our urge to merge is kind of instinctual in other animals. It doesn't really seem that way with us. We learn from so many different sources nowadays that we don't need to figure it out ourselves. We have the internet, friends and peers, maybe parents, books, TV, and possibly life skills classes in school. What would it be like if we just didn't teach or explain or acknowledge it and see how long it took them to figure it out themselves? There have been documented stories where virgin couples have gone to see a doctor because they couldn't get preggers, and it's been discovered that all they've been doing is lying in bed together and waiting for something to happen. I also read a story once where the guy was inserting his eggplant into the wrong place. Like geographically, he was way off. The typical discovery and clinical testing pipeline of a pharmaceutical process looks something like this. Cell culture, to rodent models, to other animals like primates or rabbits, to humans. If at any step the substance fails the test, either for toxicity or efficacy, the potential medication is nixed, and this process of discovery and clinical testing can take up to 10 years at the cost of billions of dollars. What happens if your model systems can't fully recapitulate the human disease phenotype? So what happens is you've got a medicine that might work really well in the human, but we never know because it gets trashed because there's no response in the house model. Now, I completely understand the ethical concerns with testing on human subjects from the get-go, but if you ask me to don my mad scientist lab coat and goggles, I'd try to push for earlier testing on human subjects. Use the milk from orb spiders to build a better dental filling. By the way, they mix the DNA of spiders with goats at University of Wyoming. From my understanding, these fillings would hypothetically last exponentially longer, would bond to teeth as an organic substance, and are stronger than Teflon. It would also be minimally invasive as to set the groundwork for more invasive medical applications, such as knee replacements. If you fund me, I know the orb goat and dental guys. Identical twins have very similar DNA. If raised exactly the same way without interaction with each other, would they make the same choices? There have been studies done where separated twins chose the same career, marry a woman by the same name, and maybe even call their kids by the same names. It was crazily specific. This actually was a pretty horrifying experiment in the US in the 60s, where they purposefully split twins and adopted them out to separate parents to study them. The documentary 3 Identical Strangers is about it, and really interesting. I'd never do the experiment, but it's hard to overstate how helpful it would be to have large-scale, longitudinal data on how different chemotherapeutic meds and med cocktails affect the evolutionary trajectory of tumors. The problem is that in order to study it, you'd need to 1. Give a large number of people experimental or substandard care, which is highly unethical, and 2. Perform serial surgeries, even when they aren't medically necessary, in order to collect tissue samples from the tumors. And since every surgery carries with it some risks, this is also highly unethical. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I would really love to have a hunk of plutonium in the attic above my bedroom. I mean, the right amount would have to be sussed out first, of course. They found out that some buildings in Japan had been made with irradiated steel from stockyards near the blast zones of either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and the people that lived in them had abnormally long and cancer-free lives, presumably because, there's a scientific term for it where your body comes into some kind of homeostasis with snake venom over long enough exposure to small doses. They think that's what happened with those people and the radiation as well. Their bodies adapted to it and became far less prone to having the big C disease because of it. Also, it would lower my heating bill in the winter. Plus, I really wish we could just use molten salt reactors as well. Honestly, I think the government should give them away to property owners, as it would benefit the United States greatly to have a populace of people off the power grid, powering themselves independently and greenly with a stable power source that'll last more than 100 years for their needs, all while depleting our vast nuclear waste reserves. The economy would benefit, people would be more able to afford housing, and emissions would go down. Again, this is a very interesting idea that could benefit a lot of the human race as a whole, assuming that it goes perfectly to plan and nobody uses the abundance of available radioactive material that would result from it for their own nefarious needs. And we all know that if people can do something bad for their own personal benefit, they would. It's interesting to hear about, though. I'm a chemist, and the answer is anything. Biophysicist here. I would love to investigate CRISPR technology in vivo cancer patients, using the technology to block cleavage from occurring at specific DNA sites. I've studied this in vitro, but experimenting in a live human being could be risky waters. Electrostimulation as a means of regrowing limbs sounds pretty interesting, and I'd love to see the effects on humans. If I recall correctly, one of the problems with this is that the wound site must be kept fresh, and humans bleed out too damn quickly if their wounds aren't able to clot, which would interrupt the growth. Animal and human hybrids. Transferring consciousness to a computer so we can live forever. Or reproductive cloning so everyone can have their own organs for transplantation. I mentioned this in stem cell class one day, and I've been the weird girl ever since. Just having organs or the whole body intact, practically alive but only kept around to service your needs when you need it? If you could clone a whole human body that came to life and interacted in daily life, would it still be your spare organ farm or a whole new human? There's also the problem of the body and organs having the same predisposition you do. So what if your heart that you'd cloned had the same defaults as your now failing heart? I'd love to study language development, like sticking a bunch of babies on a remote island without outside influence and document how they learn to communicate. I want to create miniature elephants. Through ingenious genetic manipulation, I'll be able to miniaturize any living animal. And yeah, I know there's a South Park reference, and also a Jurassic Park the book reference. Mostly, I want a cuddly mini plant that I can socialize as a lovely companion, all while spiking municipal water supplies to shrink the general population and go Godzilla on their butts. That's what you get for making fun of my homemade pie, Karen. I'm an InfoSec guy. Do security researchers count as scientists yet? And I'd love to do social engineering experiments, but they're either illegal or immoral. I'd like to raise babies in various planned conditions, such as without any adult-human interaction, without language, indoors only, with different concepts of a family unit, with different concepts of gender roles, and many, many more. Stem cells. Screw morals. Frick where the cells come from, and frick religious objections. Can I fix a person who had a stroke and has half their body paralyzed? In the immortal words of Peter Griffin, why are we not funding this? Transhumanism. I want to see a heavier push towards prosthesis and the like. I have a healthy interest in immortality. We're already seeing huge advancements in prosthetics, biohacking, and extended lifespans. I'm happy to say that out of all of the things in the video up to this point, this one is actually coming along quite well. And it's been around for a very long time when you consider old-timey dental work, hearing aids, pacemakers, among other things. It's not even a question of how, only when. However, considering the insecure nature of most portable devices, IoT in general, the good will come with an unhealthy amount of bad. Say, that's a really nice, super strong prosthetic arm you've got there. It would be a shame if it went all idle hands on you. The narrator finds the prospect of transhumanism oddly terrifying, despite the fact that people would presumably be free to opt out of immortality. There is something highly unnerving to me where we can just choose to not die. I can't put my finger on why, it's a myriad of reasons. Mostly I feel like our brains would continue to degrade despite how much we slow that process, meaning we end up with a bunch of dementia-ridden cyborgs incapable of governing ourselves in the end until we all just break down. Serious answer. I'd take about 1 billion people, lock them into a completely contained living space for their entire lives, and actually science the crap out of what people eat and what their reaction is to what they eat. I would measure every single molecule that goes in and every single molecule that goes out. Measure their weight, their level of hunger, the level of physical activity, everything. What they breathe in, what they breathe out. Number 1, number 2, measure every excretion. We'd know exactly if broccoli is good or if cigarettes are bad or if you should eat eggs. This is obviously impossible and cruel, inhumane, and I would never even suggest it, but at least we'd know if we should eat eggs for breakfast or not. Grafting artificial muscles, even though I don't have any qualifications and stuff. I wouldn't be perceived as a mad scientist, just a profligate researcher. I'd be castigated and my professional reputation would be irrevocably altered, but I'd like to establish the UK's first body farm so we can replicate University of Tennessee's facility to meticulously research human decomposition. Ostensibly, I'd be indulging my personal predilection for prestige, as the justification for a body farm isn't compelling for some entomologists. It's a vanity project in their opinion. Others condemn the idea as a frivolous tourist attraction. People are amenable to donate, we just have nowhere to put them. I work mainly with snake venom, but my friend called me and told me his brother-in-law knows a guy that harvests scorpion venom. It's prohibitively expensive normally, but this guy insisted you didn't have to go through the normal process of acquiring it. So I'm imagining a sweatshop situation with various containers of scorpion venom. I feel like buying and possessing an old milk jug of scorpion juice would at least make me seem mad, to say the least. You'd be a rich mad lad though. Doesn't scorpion venom go for about $40 million per gallon? Use targeted injections of virally encoded opsins, like channel rhodopsins, and some simple signal-to-light converters to get ESP. See into the UV or far red? Sure, why not? Take in Wi-Fi-based data or EMF data? Cool, let's do it. Anything you can build a detector for, if reasonably small, you could then encode in some area of your brain. You could also swap in and out the detector as needed. Going into the dark? Let's go for some infrared. Going for a hike in the woods? How about some inbuilt GPS? I'm left-handed and I've always heard lefties are right-brained or creative and righties are left-brained or logical. I'd like to create a school, pre-kindergarten to 12th grade, that includes boarding where the only difference is that everything inside the school, door handles, computer mouses, sports equipment and scissors, are accommodated for left-handed people. The teachers would all be left-handed as well, but the students will be the usual mix of 90% right-handed and 10% left-handed. Would right-handed kids in this environment use their right brain more because they're forced to be more creative? Would the left-handed kids become more right-brained? Biologist here, and I want to develop an artificial system to grow a baby outside of the womb. The initial tests would involve a donor uterus, likely from a pig or a primate unless we can get a healthy one from a human hysterectomy, which would be connected to an artificial blood supply. This blood supply would be circulated through the 37C incubator using a pump to mimic the heartbeat. As the embryo develops, different chemicals will be pumped into the bloodstream to maintain appropriate levels of HCG, estrogen, progesterone, oxygen, and nutrients. I'd also need to develop a way to efficiently filter out waste. If we could robotize this process, you could leave it running for 9 months and get a fully developed baby without destroying your body. This would also eliminate things like fetal alcohol syndrome and other negative effects of poor diet or substance use during pregnancy. Of course, having said all that, it's highly unethical to test on humans and probably shouldn't be done. Also, very difficult to get all the chemicals and blood compositions right. Astronomer here. I would really love to get a hunk of a neutron star and bring it back to Earth and study it. Neutron stars are, as the name implies, essentially a ball of neutrons, where the amount of mass in the sun is squeezed into the size of a city. This means they're extremely dense, well beyond the labs on Earth, thus we don't know much about their properties and how they work. For example, a small fraction of neutron stars give off a beam of radio radiation, which we see as it roars around. So we call them pulsars. What actually gives off the radio beam in the first place? No one really knows. It probably has something to do with magnetic fields in a young neutron star, and we've found a class called magnetars where the magnetic field would kill you if you got within 1,000 kilometers of one. But yeah, no one has a clue how those magnetic fields get so strong either. So in conclusion, if anyone has an idea on how to get me some rocket tech to visit one in an evening, 60s cartoon villain style, let me know because I'm gonna go get a neutron star. Self-cloning. I want to know if I have a better chance at life if my double or clone is raised by a person who cares, instead of by the awful people who gave my start a huge disadvantage, to put it mildly. No, I'm not blaming them, or even if I am, it's still my job to take care of myself no matter what happened in the past. A person with my IQ and capabilities should be so much more successful instead of gradually having to make it up to zero, to emerge from a black hole of anxiety, self-doubt, and trying to make it as a loner. I want to see what happens with my generous intellectual and creative gifts if I were to actually nurture and mentor myself. Well, I'm just a student studying IT, but I'm still really interested in speciation and evolution. I remember watching a documentary about Hiroshima, I think, and how the insects have went through about 40 generations, so they've adapted to the point where they can filter out radiation. But the horses in the area are filled with it because they haven't had much generations in the radiation. So basically, I want to introduce mice, mainly because they reproduce quickly, into different environments that slowly become harsher and harsher in an attempt to make them evolve. Like, I want to make them completely aquatic, where they no longer need land and are able to live off only seaweed, or where their back legs basically become like a kangaroo that can jump really high to get around. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.